All right, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to this session where we're going to discuss interdisciplinary in practice, a case study of a system approach to air pollution in East Africa. So this panel is really intended to introduce elements of the ASAP research program, facilitate discussion with interested parties, and also allow questions to be posed to the research team. The focus of this panel is on how the research team has navigated the challenges and opportunities of interdisciplinary research. Just a note for the audience, we are recording audio this event, and we will upload it on the ASAP website. So internal structure and how we're going to run this session. So first of all, I'm going to provide very quickly some bit of context and also give you a brief overview of what the ASAP East Africa project is. Then I will pass on to my colleagues who will present aspects of our work program. So firstly, Professor Michael Gattari from the University of Nairobi will present on air pollution monitoring. Then Dr. Mark Bribarenza from the Uganda National Roads Authority will discuss how UNRWA engages with elements of the research on emissions modeling. And finally, my colleague Dr. William Alves from the University of Birmingham will present on vulnerability scoping studies. Then we will open the discussion between and amongst the panel members and the audience. So first of all, looking at how important urban development is, it is clear that the 21st century is the century of the urban. In 2014, an estimated 54%, around 3.8 billion people were living in towns or cities. And we expect that by 2050, 66% of people are projected to live in urban areas, with the highest rates of urban growth expected in low and middle income countries. And most especially, it is poor informal settlements on the peri-urban peripheral African and Asian cities that growth is expected to be the greatest. And of course, in this context of rapid urbanization, the WHO estimates that globally, urban air pollution levels have increased by 8% between 2008 and 2013. And they are expecting to rise further given the continuing rapid urban development. Looking at this, you may all be aware that the effects of air pollution on the human health are well documented. In a range of studies, we know that exposure increases the risk of lung cancer, of heart disease, bronchitis, and other cardiorespiratory conditions. Recent studies as well have highlighted a robust relationship between air quality and infant mortality in Africa, and a strong link with diabetes. So clearly, air pollution is considered as a global environmental health threat, contributing to an estimated 37 million deaths per year worldwide. If we're now looking at the East African context, air pollution is considered as a leading cause of morbidity and mortality. For example, in Ethiopia, air pollution, both indoor and outdoor combined, contributes to an estimated 77,000 deaths. In Kenya, 19,000 deaths, and in Uganda, 22,000. So what we're doing within the ASAP research project. So ASAP East Africa project brings together UK and East African researchers to explore the causes and consequences of air pollution. Our expertise is drawn from atmospheric science, urban planning, economic geography, public health, social sciences, and civil engineering to provide a framework for improved air quality management in East African cities. And specifically, we're looking at Addis Ababa, Kampala, and Nairobi. So globally, addressing the challenge of air pollution has significantly evolved in recent years. The emerging trend in air quality management recommends that effective air quality interventions require not only diagnosing and modeling air pollutants, but also the development of a holistic approach where the special nature of air pollutants, social, economic, and institutional factors are integrated. And this integration happens through the development of interdisciplinary research and cross-cutting policy interventions. So what we're doing within the ASAP East Africa project is developing and applying a mixed methods approach to the analysis of air pollution challenges. The multi-country interdisciplinary teams deploys a number of approaches to understand the causes and consequences of air pollution, synthesizing outputs of these to support the development of policy recommendations. You can see on the slides how we've been moving and making our overall framework evolved. It is clear that with increasing numbers living in towns and in cities, these must be at the forefront of efforts to address air pollution. Managing air pollution is, however, a very complex task, requiring sustained commitment, technical knowledge, data to inform decision, and multi-stakeholder action at various levels, international level, national, and local level. It also needs to be done across stakeholder groups from the public, private, and civil society. So what I will do now is pass over to Michael, who will discuss air pollution monitoring in East Africa.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Next slide. I'm from East Africa. I'm going to talk about air pollution monitoring in Nairobi, a case study by ASAP in East Africa. But due to my nice memory, I will acknowledge ASAP East Africa team for excellent travel arrangements and commitment to have a voice in this conference. I also would like to recognize the International Science Program for their support of research capacity development at the institute, at my home institute, and also providing my travel insurance. On here is you can see better the map showing Ethiopia, Kenya, and Uganda, the three countries which are involved in this project. And the kind of situation we are looking for is what you can see. And next. And we have this kind of scenarios where even people walking next to what we call our public transports, they are under behind smoking vehicles. Incidentally, the heart of ASAP is assessing air quality status in East Africa, in the three capital cities. And we also know that air is bad, but it is ignored or prioritized for many reasons. As Lorraine has mentioned, the negative impact on human health and well-being, ecosystems impact, the climate impact, you name it. This air pollution have those problems contributed. Next. Now, well, Lorraine has mentioned the kind of diseases you expect. We also know that air particles in the atmosphere and gases in the atmosphere, which constitute air pollution, they have an interference of the energy we get from the sun, which drives the climate. Now, we also have knowledge that air pollution increases, air pollutant in the atmosphere increases directly, in direct proportion to population growth, especially in urban, in non-informal sectors, or what you call slums. Socioeconomic development and economic development also contribute to air pollution increase if there is no abatement. And of course, in the region, there is low air quality knowledge on air pollution. The critical output or the gap to an acceptable state of affairs is the fact that while we scientists understand a bit and not all, there is a total lack of knowledge within the larger communities, and therefore research funding, which also contribute now to no sustainable air quality evidence gathering activities completely or limited. And therefore, and on top, the cost of instrumentation, air quality assessment instrumentation is also very high. And therefore, correction of acceptable information for development of evidence-based policies is not available. Well, what are we talking about? The particulate matter component is, the particulate matter is actually a component of what we call atmospheric aerosols, and their physiochemical properties vary diversely. Regional, across the cities, you name it. But what is an aerosol? An aerosol is actually a solid or a liquid particle which is suspended in the air, and the whole mess is what we call an aerosol. And most of the sources, like natural sources, are with brown dust storms, eruptions, biogenic, volcanic eruptions, biogenic, and so forth. And the worst, which we have the capacity to control or to reduce, is the anthropogenic or man-made sources, which are mainly traffic, and combustion industrial processes, power plants, construction, etc., etc. And even indoor burning of waste to make energy and so forth, and etc. So, what are the impacts of what impact do we see due to particulate matter? Impact of airborne particulate matter are commonly assessed through atmospheric concentrations. You know how much is in a volume of air. You also see the visibility, how far you can see. And also the satellites have a way of giving quorum information. And atmospheric concentrations means the most common are gravimetric and light scattering technique, where gravimetric is you collect dust, you weigh on a balance, and then you have mass, and you convert that to concentrations. Light scattering is already programmed because you get the concentration immediately. Visibility is how far you can see. Because immediately there is a lot of air pollution, you are reflected right from the source of what you are supposed to see. It's also interfered with due to scattering. And therefore, there is a reduction in visibility. And of course, the satellite data is quorum data, which we can say is a visibility by the satellites, not human beings. Now, the map you can see is what the World Health Organization is reporting in 2018 on concentration of the particulate matter, which is less than 2.5 micrometer in diameter. And these particles have been measured according to them, and therefore they have corrected the measurements and now contributed to this mapping. And the mapping shows you East Africa, those three countries which you can see are not very nice. There is high air pollution concentration, and yeah. And then you can see the visibility for the last, from 1970 to 2010, visibility in cities of interest. You can see the amount of reduction of how far you can see, and it means the higher the lower the visibility, the higher the air pollution. This map we have just got it from, it's already on the NASA website. It is a combination of modeling and measurements, and you can see clearly that they have been able to put in to model the wildfires in North America, the Saharan dust in North Africa, and also the agricultural burning. And you can also see some sea salt where you can see blue, which is a consequence of sea salt and so forth. So, the initial study, which actually catapulted the ASAP project to move on, the measurements we selected was done in February to March 2017, and we selected these sites. One near a road in the central Nairobi, by business district. Another background site in the University of Nairobi, at 17 meters above ground, and a rural background site 150 kilometers area around 240 kilometers north of Nairobi, on an area distance of about 100 kilometers. Anyway, the main methods which were used were light scattering using optical particle counters. And they measure particles less than 1 micrometer in diameter, 2.5, less than 10, and in intervals of 10 seconds. And this is what we normally average after that. But these optical counters are not, they have a very large uncertainty, so we had to do calibration with the gravimetric, which is more has better accuracy. And the two sites we are showing is the ones in Nairobi. because the other site is far in a better environment. But you can see one is near the road, and the other one is at the university at 17 meters above ground level. And the kind of concentration we got are shown here: average particulate matter from particles less than 2.5 micrometer, less than 10 micrometer. And of course, the red ones have an implication because they are showing you the percentage of incidences when the concentrations in the atmosphere were above the World Health Organization recommended levels. And you can see in the urban roadsides, 85% for PM2.5 and 90% for PM10. It's really like the whole period was bad. So, key observations. We had high PM at the urban roadside, which really has a signature of traffic emissions if you compare with the others. And traffic emissions also include the resuspended dust from the road. And further observation shows you that showed us that there was high concentrations in the morning and high concentrations in the evening. These are rush hours when everybody is going home or coming to work. And in the back, and you can see that the concentration in the urban background are more than 1.5, a factor of 1.5 compared to the roadside, and for the rural is more than 3, a factor of 3. And we also noticed that the concentrations were high variable. We expect this in normal, because this is an environmental issue, and a significant amount of mineral dust was also sensed, and which also could also be explained by the high particulate matter, particles of less than 10 micrometers in diameter. Because what we call coarse particles are particles with a diameter between 10 micrometer and 2.5 micrometer. That means from 2.5 to 10 micrometer in diameter. Those particles, we normally call them coarse particles. Below 2.5, we segregate them and call them fine particles. And the fine particles are able to go deep into the lung system and interfere with the oxygen exchange and other effects. So our data actually confirmed what was done in 2011 by Tine et al. At an opposite site, the roadside site. The concentrations were in the region of 100 micrometer and 140, 90, and so forth. It also concludes that there is a high pollution in Nairobi. Other previous short studies, they implicate Nairobi to be in the category of megacities, which megacities are those defined as those cities with more than a population of 10 million people. However, all said and done, we need long-term data to give critical, regulatory, and regulatory acceptable evidence. Because short studies are not able to pick variability properly because of seasonal variability, movement of people, population increase. So you need long-term data, annual, and so forth. And I say thank you and invite William to tell you what he has. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. So as Michael has noted, collecting data on air pollution alone is not enough. The ASAP research team also seeks to model air pollutants and use this information to inform the decisions taken by national governments, in particular national roads agencies. Whilst air quality monitoring networks are being established in many cities, they are only able to give detailed information on past and present air pollution levels. New approaches to understanding the problem of air quality are required. Increasingly, air quality monitoring networks are supported by the use of numerical models to forecast future levels of pollution. These models are aimed at the identification of which measures will have most impact on pollutant levels. The use of such models allows the simulation of present and future conditions, evaluating the effects of mitigation policies, investments, and land use modifications on air quality. A model for air quality simulation requires 3 main types of input: information on urban and non-urban land use, information of regional and local meteorology, and inventories of man-made and natural emissions. The results of simulations can be used to map the different diffusion patterns within a selected area. The effects of possible emission mitigation policies can be assessed through the analysis of scenarios. The maps on this slide show an example from past work carried out in Santiago de Chile, where scenarios were created in line with the national plan to use emissions. The first small blue square illustrates what impact those policies related to transport would have. The second map illustrates those policies related to home heating. And finally, the third map indicates those policies associated with emissions on both sectors combined. And as you can see, combining policy recommendations has the most impact in such settings. For the purpose of Work Package 4, 2 numerical models will be implemented. The first model is HDM4, and this is designed to simulate road network management, investment alternatives, and to quantify the emissions generated by the road network. The second is a modelling system that allows the simulation of local meteorology and of the main chemistry transport processes affecting air quality. One intended beneficiary of these models will be the Uganda National Roads Authority. I will now ask Mark Riberenzia to reflect on the role of UNRWA as a facilitator of interdisciplinary research and of multi-stakeholder engagement.
Thank you, William. So, as we all have heard, and we know from our discussions this week, it is clear that with increasing numbers of people living in towns and cities, this must be at the forefront of our efforts to see that we address the growing problem of air pollution. We have already seen that in some of the areas where we're studying, this problem is very significant, although it isn't yet very well appreciated by the public. And so coming in from an implementing agency, this also becomes imperative to us because we are the bridge between academia, policymakers, implementers, and practitioners. So UNRWA is very pleased to be part of this research and will continue to support and participate in it. So managing air pollution is, however, a complex process requiring sustained commitment, technical knowledge, data to inform good decisions, and multi-stakeholder action at various levels. The diagram you see in front of you is really explaining some of these concepts. And the various stakeholders really operate at different levels. So we really have to look through international to national to local level. And it's across multiple stakeholder groups, to the public, the private, and civil society. So in this regard, the Uganda National Road Authority in Uganda is taking up the opportunity of serving as a facilitator, a catalyst of interdisciplinary research. And in this setting, we're linking, for instance, practitioners, implementing agencies like ourselves, policymakers like the ministry who oversee us, as well as academics in Uganda and across both the global south and the global north. So just for example, in the case of Uganda, we are working collaboratively with Ndeje University, Makerere University, and Chambogo University. And then we've got broader research partnerships already ongoing with CSIR of South Africa, the University of Pretoria, as well as here in the University of Birmingham. And in addition to that, we have networks which we belong to, like the Research for Community Access, which is a DFID-supported program, the High Volume Transport Research Program, the Africa Road and Transport Research Program, as well as the ASAP East Africa, the Sustainable Mobility for All, which is an initiative led by the World Bank and the United Nations, and in the case of this research, the ASAP East Africa project that involves Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, and the hub is here in Birmingham. So what we see ourselves in this role as the consumer of the eventual product of this research. and the drivers of its implementation. So we come in at the end of the uptake and the embedment to see that this valuable research is actually going to make a difference in the lives of our people. And in that case, we are fostering multiple stakeholder engagement, for we see this as the pathway to have holistic solutions to the complex problem of air pollution. I will invite my colleague William to come and continue.
Thank you, Mark. So the final aspect that we are going to talk about today is vulnerability scoping studies. As my colleagues Lauren, Mark and Michael have mentioned, engaging with a variety of stakeholder groups is at the heart of the ASAP East Africa project. Given the public good nature of the project and the intention of raising the profile of air pollution as a leading public health risk, I'm going to discuss these vulnerability scoping studies in some depth. So vulnerability scoping studies are intended to explore the experiences of those particularly vulnerable populations, occupations and locations exposed to high levels of air pollutants. By undertaking vulnerability scoping studies, the research team seeks to generate a more textured understanding of specific characteristics and factors associated with vulnerability to air pollution. 3 dimensions of vulnerability are commonly identified in the literature. The first is exposure, the second susceptibility, and the third adaptive capacity. So the first of our vulnerability scoping studies explores the vulnerability of students who attend an inner city Nairobi primary school. A number of factors illustrate the pertinence of this study. Globally, the length of time children over the age of 5 spend in education has increased from 10.1 years in 1999 to 11 years in 2007. The average length of the school year ranges from 175 to 220 days. Children aged 5 to 12 spend up to 8 to 10 hours per day at school, of which 2 to 3 hours are spent outdoors. Finally, the UNICEF estimates that circa 300 million children are exposed to toxic levels of outdoor air pollution. Available studies drawn from a range of geographic settings demonstrate that air quality in and around schools is often of poor quality and that various pollutants are found in classrooms, sometimes at elevated levels. In such environments, a number of factors that affect air quality include emissions from indoor sources. This slide we have here shows in the grey area indoor classroom-based sources and around it outdoor sources. There is, however, a paucity of evidence pertaining to air pollution exposure of school children in sub-Saharan Africa. To probe this issue further, the ASAP research team initiated a monitoring campaign in association with the University of Nairobi at an educational setting. Air pollution was monitored on a school-based scale via the deployment of 2 air pollution monitors, one installed within a classroom and one outdoor in the school grounds. Monitoring data suggests that air pollution levels at both indoor and outdoor monitoring sites regularly exceed the WHO guidelines and possess a direct health risk to those who spend significant proportions of their time in such locations. Whilst the presentation of this data is meaningful to some within the room, namely those with a scientific background, I, as a social scientist, struggle to digest what is being communicated. As a team, we have sought to explore how we can translate this scientific information in a manner which lay audiences can engage with and understand. One means that we are seeking to do this is to adapt the US Environmental Protection Agency's Air Quality Index Scale. This illustrates how different levels of air pollution, in this regard related to PM2.5, contribute to different health impacts amongst different groups. To contextualize this data in a slightly different format, here we can see data gathered pertaining to air pollution levels at an indoor and outdoor setting over an average school day, and this is taken directly from the inner city Nairobi school. The background colours reflect the US EPA categorizations of air pollution levels. Green indicates good, yellow moderate, orange unhealthy for sensitive groups, and red unhealthy for all. The dotted red line on this image illustrates the WHO air quality standards. So why is this important? It illustrates that air pollution is elevated during the school day between 8 and 4. It indicates that air quality is at its worst during the period when students arrive at school. This picks up on a theme discussed by Michael and Mark about the impacts of vehicular emissions on air pollution. It also suggests that schools may want to structure outdoor activities during certain times when air pollution is lower. A survey was also undertaken at the school to explore perceptions of air pollution. Exploring perceptions of air pollution provides an opportunity to investigate societal attitudes towards the issue and to draw associations between perceived and actual exposure. This survey is primarily used for illumination purposes to identify areas of future research and to identify broad trends and differences across participant responses. It also highlights those policy interventions that groups would be most interested in or supportive of. I will now pass back to my colleague Lauren to discuss interdisciplinarity in practice.
Thank you very much, William, and many thanks again for Michael and for Mark for their excellent contribution. So this panel has highlighted that contemporary challenges are increasingly complex, and new approaches and tools are needed to achieve sustainable solutions to protect the environment and public health. We believe that such approaches are best supported by developing interdisciplinary research projects that foster discussions across disciplinary boundaries, but also forge links with multiple stakeholders. Again, this includes representatives of the public, private sector, and also the civil society. However, it is obvious that there are a lot of challenges that are apparent. Those challenges, for example, include communication between the disciplines. It can be difficult. It would be a lie to say that our journey has been very easy. It can be difficult, but an interdisciplinary team must set aside time to learn how to communicate with one another without confusion and also by using a common language. The second challenge is really a matter of coordination between the researchers. Teams of that type must ensure that they are able to meet in person and must set aside time to do so. This may be difficult when collaborators are geographically dispersed, and we all know that Skype doesn't work all the time. Respect between disciplines is the third challenge. Research teams of that kind of sort must give experts from each discipline an equal amount of respect. Unfortunately, assumptions about other disciplines may exist, and this can damage interdisciplinary collaborations. Teams must identify these tensions, and they must structure the team to ensure that each discipline has equal status. This is very important to ensure that each member's knowledge, experience, and also understanding are being represented in the team's work. And finally, collaboration across geographical regions. It is a potential barrier that teams need to overcome. Regular face-to-face contact sustains collaboration, puts social pressure on collaborators, helps collaborators control distraction, and amplifies individuals' ideas leading to insight. And of course, we cannot forget research uptake and impact. So, as we have in this room a representative of a government agency, Mark, we would like to draw on his expertise to really discuss the role of interdisciplinary research and how this type of research can influence policy development. To frame this, we have identified a couple of cross-cutting questions. We're not asking Mark to answer all of them, but essentially to use this to inform the discussion. Once we started discussing this, William will just take over to just give you a bit more and final information about the ASAP project. But for instance, Mark, up to you.
Thanks, Lauren, and thanks for setting up a few thought starters. So I will share my thoughts from the perspective, again, of the final consumer of this kind of work, as well as a sponsor, because we are also interested in this kind of work. And so thoughts on how interdisciplinary research can support engagement with multiple stakeholder groups across multiple domains. Now here I'd like to turn our attention to groups such as civil society, academia, practitioners, donors, so MDAs, governments. How can multidisciplinary research support this engagement? From all sides, you realize that everybody understands that the problems that we face today are not like they were many hundreds of years back. They're very complex. And so no one can be fooled into believing that there's simplistic solutions that can be addressed from one center of knowledge or one discipline. And so already having a multidisciplinary approach to things draws in people because they see that the problems are being well coined, and they can also appreciate that whatever skill set they have is going to have a home, is going to be respected, and is going to be valued in generation of a solution. You get a solution that is holistic, and anybody can see how they play a role. And this leads then into how academics can engage with government bodies, because these are now two of the stakeholders we've just mentioned. And really, this lends itself to academia has got to come to a point where it understands that governments are driven by policies, promises, and agendas. And so while academia might come from a position of pure knowledge and advancement of the understanding of humanity, governments tend to have a certain timeline, and they have to deliver certain things, because when people come and say, our cities are getting polluted, they want a solution. They want government to do something. So government, people like us, are keen to have a well thought out scientific solution, but it has to be timely, because the population are demanding a solution immediately. So there is that balance that academia has got to approach government. As well, government, we need to improve in understanding the drivers of academic research and the thinking of academia. So, and we are certainly trying to make those inroads to understand that academia cannot be able to function and come up with credible research if we are going to then base everything on very tight timelines. So both ways we need to come to each other, and I believe in programs like ASAP, which are really bringing together all stakeholders, we're making inroads into this. So, and this leads again to the third one, which is the challenges we have in accessing academic research and the languages that are used. The language, broadly speaking, of much academic research is about fundamental knowledge, which is in very complex kind of Puritan concepts that are presented. Whereas the language that government understands is very simple, very practical, and something that's going to drive action immediately. So I like to think of that as the confluence of fundamental research versus applied research, so solution-based research. But at the heart of it, we see that these two languages are not different, because in order to get to the applied research, which is research in action, which the government requires, it must be grounded by solid fundamental research. Otherwise, it's then just about assumptions and simplifications. And we in government can do that without support from anybody else. So it's really, again, us coming to understand our various perspectives. So, for instance, as academics, I would advise that when you're presenting your work to government, don't give us a very complicated journal article. We have a lot to do already. You know, simplify it into a good policy brief. We don't need the references. We can refer to you to find the references for us. Just get us a good policy brief that is giving us the underpinning facts, a few graphs, and some recommendations on what we need to do. And it's also helpful to have some assumptions and risks. so that we know we can take decisions, and it's informed by the solid research that you have underlining that policy brief. So I think we can get a long way, but we just need to understand our different drivers. I'll talk a bit about the challenges of funding originating in the global north, really. This is very important for government research institutes like ourselves, as well as for academics in the global south. Now, first and foremost, I will say that the funding is not always adequate for the research challenge. And I think this comes from an understanding of the challenge. It would be helpful if the originators of this funding get a good appreciation of the working conditions in the countries and their partner areas and what it actually takes to implement work. Because then it will become very obvious that a lot of times the funding that is provided based on the funding models that are applicable and very well established in the global north do not actually hit the light of day in the south. I have lots of examples of people who have had to half do research or abandon research because of, for instance, the timing, the cash flow of research funding coming in, which then delays the implementation of work. In addition, and this is understandable from the funders, the research tends to be tied to predefined problems and issues. Now, those issues, while they might be slightly applicable to where the money is going, which is why the money is going there, that might not be the priority. That might not be the research priority. And so then it fails to get traction, sometimes with the researchers themselves, but certainly with government. It won't get traction with us because the funding is going into something which isn't the pressing need of the time. So that sometimes causes a lot of problems. And then of course it tends to be tied to the funders' priorities. So those, I think, are the key things I would say about funding originating from the global north. And that said, we really appreciate all the support that is coming from the global north, because ultimately for a society to develop, it should be able to fund much of its research. That is our opinion. So we do appreciate all the support that comes from the global north and ask that it continue and be even increased, because the output is there to be seen. It's really driving research in the global south. On the issues of commercialization of research, I will skip that. That is on innovation. I'll be happy to discuss that in our Q&A session at the end. I'd have a lot of thoughts on that. And I'm also happy to meet with any of you outside this meeting, and we can take it further. I will then just go to the end and look at the last question, which is academic research versus applied research, and what are the drivers of this. And this comes slightly to what I said. The academic research tends to be driven by career interests. For a university, for an academic to have the respect, there is need to have publications. It's also driven by the grants, the grant calls. So they then align the researcher, and then of course what is the team building? The team might have a certain focus, whereas applied research is really life happens. So tomorrow, if we found ourselves in Birmingham and there is so much soot, then suddenly that will drive a research agenda. Or if we suddenly found there's typhoons around, then that will drive an agenda in, say, meteorology. So the applied research agenda tends to be driven by the issue of the day, the problem of the day that must be solved, and that overrides. And that, again, brings us to what I've been saying again and again, the dichotomy between the research from academia and the research that will be very easily taken up by government. So thank you for that, William.
Thank you very much.
I invite you back.
So I'm just going to pass it over to William, just in order essentially just to have 5 minutes probably, just to give an overview of what really ASAP East Africa is, and then what we'll do is move towards the Q&A session.
So, as a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary research team, we believe that interdisciplinarity offers great potential. However, it is often difficult to implement in practice. As in the ASAP project, we identified a range of social problems and scientific problems associated with air pollution. We came together and identified a common research subject and formed a team of experts to address this issue. We are in the process of producing new, connecting knowledge within and between disciplines. We believe that this process in itself facilitates interdisciplinary integration. This will inform subsequently both scientific practice and social practice, which will encourage a greater understanding of the issue and new ways of addressing it. We don't believe that this is a linear process with a start and a finish. Rather, it represents a cycle that will repeat and repeat. There is, however, a need to mediate engagement across disciplines by forging spaces and places of discussion and debate. In the ASAP project, we have attempted to do that through the following means. Quarterly webinars provide a space for academics from across disciplines come together to discuss and debate issues of relevance. 3 of these have been produced to date. Each webinar is accompanied by a short reading pack that introduce lay audiences to technical subjects. We also commission literature reviews that aim to collate and systematize literature pertaining to a certain issue. Journal articles are produced. We are increasingly attempting to collectively develop these as an interdisciplinary exercise. This can be challenging given the subject-specific nature of many leading journals. Finally, public events such as this provides an opportunity to bring together partners from across countries and discuss and debate key issues.
Thank you very much, William. Thank you again to Michael and to Mark. I think all those presentations were fascinating. So for technical issues, we're just going to end here the recording, but we're now going to leave it over to the audience for questions.